21. Safe. John. "Grab her, now!" I heard as I moved towards her. I reached forward just as Claudia took a big step toward the edge. I grabbed her and pulled her to me. She dropped into my arms, blankly gazing up, lost and confused. It was like she wasn't even there. Then she passed out. All at once, the vortex vanished. "Claudia!" I called to her, but if this thing had drained her completely, she would not respond. Joseph came to my side and knelt next to me. Michael came through the roof door. He looked speechless. He had no idea what had just taken place, nor any idea we already knew of her abilities. It was going to be interesting to try to explain everything when it came down to it. I wondered how he would take it, knowing Joseph had only discovered it when he had attempted to kidnap her. "What happened?" Michael muttered. "I think she passed out." "What was she doing out here?" I don't know. I just found her up here," I uttered, carefully lifting her gently in my arms. I hadn't lied, maybe omitted a few details. Michael didn't know what to say. Joseph patted his arm when the older man gazed in his direction. He was unable to offer us a reason for what was happening. "It's all right. It's just good John found her when he did. Quickly, John, bring her in," Joseph ordered me as a confused and worried Michael glanced over the side of the building. Below us, the buses slowly started to move. One at a time, they drove out of the parking lot like a line of disciplined soldiers. "Let's take her to my office," Joseph suggested. He lifted his radio as he opened the roof door for me. Michael reached out and stopped him. "Who are you calling?" Michael asked. He looked fearful, unsure of what we'd seen. He had walked in to find Claudia in my arms and nothing of what had come before. He hadn't seen the vortex or Claudia about to plunge to her death. I didn't want to worry him further. "Relax, Michael. Everything's going to be okay." "Who are you calling?" Michael insisted on having his question answered. I motioned for Joseph to tell him. I was certain he was afraid of what our intentions were. I wondered if she had fainted since she had been with him. I knew it had happened while she was with me. "I'm calling Mr. Claypool," Joseph answered politely. Michael released his hand and allowed him to use his radio to summon the man. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm just concerned for her. Being a parent is all new to me," Michael said. He looked apologetic. "Not at all, Michael. I understand." Joseph handed him the radio. "Would you like to do the honors?" he asked. Michael nodded and took the radio from Joseph's hands. "Mr. Claypool, what is your location?" he asked into the device. A clear voice from the other end responded. "In my office, sir?" "We have a problem. Meet me in the main office. Clear everyone around, please." "Claudia?" the man asked from the other end. Joseph and I weren't surprised to find Mr. Claypool was already in the loop. Michael seemed uneasy by Mr. Claypool's observation and response. "Yes, sir," Michael answered, looking slightly troubled. "Sir, the main office? What do I say to Dr. Mueller?" the man asked. His voice was shaky with nerves. Michael kept his composure as Joseph narrowed his eyes over at him. "It's okay, Mr. Claypool," Joseph interrupted, sounding firm and confident. "Please do what Michael asked immediately. We're headed down to you now." "Dr. Mueller?" he uttered in confusion. He was surprised to hear it was Joseph at the other end of the radio. "Yes, it's him. Please, hurry. We are headed in that direction," Michael responded. "Okay, yes, sir. On my way." Michael's face was riddled with questions, but he was far more intrigued by what he was discovering about his principal and me. Could we know something, or were we just extremely helpful? "Has this happened before?" Joseph asked. Michael didn't say anything. I could completely understand. He wasn't sure whether or not to trust us. "Pass out?" he asked. It had to be a difficult question for him to answer, not knowing exactly what had taken place on the roof. Joseph nodded. "Not as far as I know. She's never passed out before," he answered. "Any medical condition you know about?" Joseph asked the most obvious logical question. He was giving Michael an opportunity for a plausible explanation. Michael shook his head to this as well. "None that I'm aware of. What really happened?" he asked. He intentionally directed his question at me. "I'm not sure. I found the door to the roof open and found her passed out there, I managed. Joseph shot me a glance. The less details I offered, the better. We didn't know how much he knew. I would let Claudia explain it to him. Michael opened the door and checked the hall. The corridor was empty. The rush of students had already abandoned the halls. "Hurry, John, to my office," Joseph directed, ushering me into the hallway. We were just a few feet from the main office. Mr. Claypool was already there and opened the door for us. Mrs. Wallace wasn't at her desk. I entered the main office with Claudia in my arms. Mr. Claypool closed the door behind us as we stepped into the office. I set Claudia down on the couch. Michael looked over and Mr. Claypool noticed the expression on his face. I heard them speaking in reference to Mrs. Wallace's absence. "I sent her to make a few copies," he offered Michael in response. Joseph smiled at both men. "It's all right, Mr. Claypool," Joseph managed. "Is she okay, John?" I nodded. She didn't move as I took a seat beside her to stroke a lock of her hair away from her face. "Claudia," I whispered as I leaned down to kiss her cheek. "Talk to me." I wanted to know why there was no connection between us, what was interfering. Anger consumed me. I hadn't been there to protect her from whatever had tried to take her into that vortex. I should have been there. Was it that Shadow Man or Project X? Both of those things wanted to possess her. "What happened?" Mr. Claypool looked over at Michael. The old man could offer him no answer. Mr. Claypool seemed confused to see us all there. He became increasingly more uneasy as we stood there now, facing them. "I think she might have fainted," I offered when Michael didn't provide an answer. Michael pressed his lips together. He shook his head in resignation. "Thank you, John," he said politely. He had a hard time meeting my eyes. "I'm glad you were the one to find her." "I know what she can do," I immediately said, rising from the side of the couch. His eyes darted straight at me when I said those words. "What do you mean?" He pretended not to understand. I smirked. "I know you're protecting her, but I'm not a threat to her, nor is my uncle. I know what she can do, her gift, her ability, whatever you want to call it." Michael and Mr. Claypool looked rather startled by the idea we knew. "How did you know?" Michael immediately answered, unwillingly realizing he had revealed I had spoken the truth. "She told me, and she's shown me," I answered. I didn't know what else to tell him. "She told you?" I nodded, pressing my lips inward, speechless, wondering what his reaction would be. He looked surprised more than anything else to hear she would just tell someone else. A part of him seemed shocked she hadn't mentioned anything to him. It affected him that he didn't know what had been happening in her life. I had no idea she had said anything. I didn't know what to tell him. Certainly not the truth. I knew enough to know that Claudia wouldn't want him to worry. "Sometimes it's hard, Michael. I think she didn't want you to worry. And she didn't know what you would make of me, I guess. Maybe she was getting around to it?" I tried to ease his mind. Michael seemed to attempt to make sense of my words, then finally said, "I should take her home." Joseph nodded. "Sure, it's probably best." "If you don't mind, can I take her home?" I volunteered. "That's really nice and kind of you, John, but no, I should. I'm her guardian." "Let me help. I'm worried about her," I pleaded. I glanced back over to where Claudia laid. Michael did the same. He nodded at my request. "I'm glad it was you she trusted with her secret. It's very important no one else knows this," Michael whispered. "She's very special." "That she is, sir," Joseph agreed. "John knows that. You can trust him." "Oh, I do. You both have done a lot for Claudia, protecting her from that horrible man who tried to—" He stopped, unable to finish that sentence. "Thank you." Claudia opened her eyes. She saw Mr. Claypool, Joseph, Michael, and me standing alongside her. She immediately sat up, confused about where she was. She looked around and stared up at our worried faces. "Claudia, are you okay?" Michael knelt beside her. She blinked up at him in a daze, realizing she was in Joseph's office. "What happened?" she asked, looking around the room, wondering why she was in the office, and why all these men were staring back at her like concerned guardians of a royal heir. Miss Bell, how are you feeling? She glanced up at Joseph's question. You had us worried. I came over and took a seat beside her. I pushed back a lock of her hair. Our link had reconnected. At once I felt her sadness. Claudia, what's wrong? She seemed to be having trouble remembering. There were images in her mind. I could make out a few, mostly the vortex, but there was one of Rachel. How did I get here? She uttered. Michael neared. John found you passed out on the roof. Do you remember what happened? How you got there? Claudia shook her head, but I could feel far more from her feelings. Sadness, anger, and betrayal. And they were all aimed at me. Are you okay? I reached a hand to touch her cheek as a tear escaped her pooling eyes. She recoiled, staring back at me. She didn't know whether to hate me or how exactly to feel. Her face was riddled with emotions. I stroked her cheek gently. Again she pulled away from me. It pained me when she did it. I didn't understand. Joseph gave me a glance as he took a phone call and walked out of the office to take it privately. It was important. I focused my attention back on Claudia. Claudia, why do you pull away? I don't know, she answered after a small pause. Please, don't lie. What happened just before the roof? She looked lost and scared. It's okay, Michael smiled. I'm going to take you home. Claudia looked over at him and objected. Michael, I'm fine. No, I think you need to go home and get some rest. Claudia looked far more confused than before. Michael moved away to talk to Mr. Claypool. It seemed they were discussing something I wasn't meant to hear. I wondered if it had anything to do with the fact that I knew about Claudia's gift. Did something happen? I persisted. Claudia, please talk to me. She now looked over at me when she hadn't before. Rachel, she finally admitted. She didn't know why the name made her so angry with me. Rachel had attacked her, but I knew it was only the trigger to something else that was trying to keep her in her current state of mind. I don't know why I feel this way or why I'm angry. But it's just like I have to be. It doesn't make any sense, she tried to explain. I could feel the uncertainty of her emotions. Nothing was making any sense to her. Everything was all mixed up, the product of an overflowing bottle that had dropped from a very high place. Her confusion was tearing her apart. I could see she didn't want to feel this animosity towards me. John, she pressed her lips together, I don't know why I'm feeling this overwhelming urge to... She lowered her eyes. She couldn't look at me. I knew what she meant to say. She felt the urge to hate me. Something wanted her to break her connection to me. One look from her and I knew she wasn't giving up on me, on us. I'm taking you home, I decided. I reached for her. She tried to pull away. I knew the best way to keep us together was to hold her to me. She needed to shake the displaced feelings away. She needed to fight it. Claudia settled into my arms and stopped resisting, releasing a long-awaited breath. It seemed the worst had passed. Although I could still feel confusion in her mind and emotions, she was fighting hard to regain control. Joseph re-entered the office. I set my eyes on him. His gaze was enough to tell me something was wrong. He approached Michael and Mr. Claypool as the two were talking at a distance from Claudia and I. Sir, I would hate to interrupt, but my brother would like for us to join him this evening at a chateau cuisine, he suddenly said. Michael looked towards him. A wrinkle fashioned his tired, worried face. I said you would be delighted to attend. I expected Michael to say no to the invitation being on such short notice. Not to mention what had happened to Claudia not long ago. I doubted he wanted to leave her alone. I understand you're worried about Claudia, but my brother is not one to take no for an answer, Joseph informed him. Michael nodded. I wouldn't think of canceling after his generous donations, he suddenly said. Joseph blinked. It was obvious he knew about the donation. However, it was something I was just hearing about. You heard about that? Joseph suddenly asked. His lips wrinkled. Of course it was an act on his part. Yes. The superintendent of the HISD is a very good friend of mine. He called me earlier today to inform me we were getting the funds we needed. I've been asking for those funds since—" He looked over at Mr. Claypool, who finished the sentence for him. "Years now." "Let's just say since James has been an assistant principal and Neil was in charge." I grinned, watching the expression on Joseph's face. Claudia suddenly held my hand. I spun my head back as a shy smile greeted me from her face. "So," Michael explained, "no, I wouldn't think of not attending dinner. I need to thank him for his generosity." Joseph smiled. "He'll be happy to know that. I think Miss Bell's little speech gave him the inspiration to give to Milton. He's one to root for the underdog." Joseph laughed. Claudia looked, overhearing her name, but she was more involved with the sensation of our connection. She seemed to be more like herself. "Michael?" Claudia's voice suddenly got all our attentions. "Can John take me home?" Michael hesitated, looking over at Mr. Claypool. "I can come over and stay with her," Mr. Claypool volunteered. "John, I would assume you'll be at the dinner with your father?" I blinked over and smiled politely. Claudia's hand tightened around my own. I felt rewarded by her energy again. "I love you," I heard her mind say to me. It sent a spark into my veins. I was on fire and alive again. The hands of both our watches were moving rapidly. I could already hear Joseph's thoughts scold me. "This is why she can't come with us." "Boss's orders," I said. Joseph wrinkled his eyes at me on my choice of words. "Yes," I cleared my throat. "Yes, I'll be there. Dad will want to hear about how I've been getting along in my studies, and anything else in my life." I tried to stay off the topic of girlfriends. "Of course," Michael said. He looked over at Joseph, wondering if he would also be there. Joseph answered his unspoken question immediately. "I'll be there if that's what you're wondering. Sometimes it feels like I have to report to the man regarding everything." "Everything?" Michael asked. It looked like Joseph had gone off script as well. I think he had it handled, though. "Things regarding his son. You know, is he eating right? What is he doing with his free time? All the lovely, normal things a father insists on being privy to, especially when that father is forced to ask another man to care for his son." "Right, I can understand that very well." Michael looked back at Claudia. He truly did understand the burden placed on Joseph, although I don't think he'd ever lump Claudia in as a burden. "I guess it would be all right if John takes you home. James will be there to keep you safe for the rest of the night while I get acquainted with John's father." He grinned over at me. Claudia's hand tightened around mine. The connection was so strong between us I thought we would start glowing. "I'm kind of curious to get to know the man who gave Milton such a generous donation, and who is such a strong male role model in John's life." Joseph and I were quiet on that part. In a way, there was some truth to his statement. Dr. Nicholson was a big part of my life. I grew up knowing the man in the academy as an important part of my development. So I guess, in a way, Michael was right. "James, are you sure you don't mind?" Michael asked. "I think I might only have leftovers at home for dinner. Maybe you can pick up a pizza on your way. Honey, would you like that?" Claudia gazed over at him and nodded. She was too involved with me to really care. "I wish you could stay with me," she said. "I know, me too. But I have to go. I have to report to Dr. Nicholson. I hope he doesn't get suspicious, because I'm not there." "As long as we don't give him a reason to, we're okay." "I like this," she said, smiling and almost giggling. "I can talk to you without others hearing what I want to tell you in private." She blushed. "Ah, I love that too." "Not at all, Michael. I'll keep Claudia company while you're out, and I'll get something for us to eat for dinner. I think pizza sounds great. What do you think, my dear?" Mr. Claypool grinned over at her. She barely paid him any attention. Michael handed Mr. Claypool some money. He smiled, refusing to take it. "It's okay, Michael. It'll be my treat." Mr. Claypool smiled. "So, John, you'll take Claudia home and Mr. Claypool will meet you at the house." "John," Joseph said. "When can I see you again?" Claudia asked. I wasn't paying attention to Joseph or Michael. "John!" Joseph raised his voice. I blinked. "Oh," I rose. "Yes, sir?" "You're glowing, Mr. Mueller," I heard Claudia. I couldn't stop blushing. She giggled. "You have some color on you, champ," Joseph said. He moved over towards me to further embarrass me, and smiled as his words made the color on my face glow brighter. I had been caught so involved with my girl by my lovely guardian. "You look so vulnerable," he came and whispered in my ear, patting my shoulder. He winked. "Never let the boss see that." "Sorry, sir," I said to Michael. I tried to ignore Joseph's words of warning as he moved over to his desk. "Of course, sir, I can do that." I immediately answered the question I had only half heard. "Not a problem." "We'll meet you there at the restaurant, then," Michael said. I nodded as the old man stepped out into the doorway. Mr. Claypool followed. "We can drive together if you like, sir," I heard Joseph say. Mr. Claypool gazed over at us standing near the entrance with Michael. "Ready, guys?" Mr. Claypool said to Claudia and me as the other men talked. Claudia immediately rose beside me and grabbed my forearm. I felt her excitement as she gripped my arm. I felt the vibe of her joy. "Let's go," she said to Mr. Claypool.